Welcome to another Lunch with Philip and Greg. Today's guest is Karl Soule, who's the Senior Technical Sales Manager at Adobe here in Los Angeles, just back from Singapore. Karl, what does the job entail?
Well, we're kind of defining it as we go a little bit. Right now Adobe's got a lot of different engagements in Hollywood on different film projects. We saw a lot of success in the last year with films like Deadpool, Hail Caesar, before that Gone Girl, and it was evident that they needed additional people to be able to handle the additional workload.
We had a little involvement with those films ourselves.
Definitely. In fact, recently you guys helped out on something I can't talk about publicly exactly, but some of the products that you guys make have helped out greatly in a workflow on a feature film that's currently in process.
Yeah. And the nice thing about that particular feature film is they're testing the workflow before they start shooting.
Exactly.
What a concept.
Exactly. Yeah, they're in mid process right now with dailies coming in where they're dealing with hours of footage, and getting the reports in place is your tools are crucial to doing that. So thank you guys again.
Well, hopefully we'll make a bit of money out of it ourselves. So is Adobe working really hard to get in with the film community?
We're taking appropriate steps. We do think that with the way Premiere and After Effects work, for a lot of people that want to kind of get visual effects and editing closer together, Premiere and After Effects have a good solution for kind of addressing some of the needs there. So it's definitely an area that we want to focus on. We kind of take things relatively slow, and in doing so, we have what we call like an engineering engagement that we do in the Hollywood space, where we just kind of make sure that we commit certain resources when we see some mutual benefit in backing a production that wants to use our tools. We'll commit engineering resources to kind of make that happen. Since it is sort of a new space for us, we've really only kind of had full-length Hollywood feature film. I've had a lot of independent productions for many, many years, but a Hollywood workflow is a little bit different with the amount of people involved, the amount of assistants that are involved, and so it is a learning experience for us as well. So we want to make sure every single version of the software that's come out in recent years has had a feature that I could point to and say, oh, that was a Deadpool feature, or oh, that was a Gone Girl feature. So this helps out us a lot because it makes Premiere Pro a better editor in the long run.
Yeah.
So it's just been a big area of our focus.
Philip, they have sandwiches as well.
Yeah. I'm going to go with the Cubano sandwich just because that's a...
Actually, Cubano sounds good, doesn't it? I mean, who else would make a Cubano better?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't have had a lot of Cuban food, I don't think, in your most recent deployment.
I got to say, the one thing that I miss, I mean, before I complain about it, let me say the food in Singapore is absolutely astounding. Like, the stuff like a chili crab, chili stingray, black pepper crab, all the different types of noodles, being able to sit and watch a guy make noodles the same way he has for like 30, 40 years, and then serve them to you in a bowl for like $3. It's absolutely amazing. That said, trying to find proper Mexican or Latin American food or Cuban food, anything to do with Latin America, South America, just doesn't exist.
Yes, and it's exactly the same thing in Australia. There is no good Mexican food in Australia because it's a long way away.
But they do call McDonald's Macca's.
They do.
They even put it on the signs now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was pretty saw that just recently in Melbourne.
Every country seems to have its own nickname for McDonald's.
Yes.
Yeah, but Australians are very good at that abbreviating thing. So you'd have a cuppa, so that would be a cup of tea, a cuppa, with a bicky, so that would be a biscuit.
Mid-arvo.
Yes, in the arvo.
In the arvo, yeah. A couple with a bicky in the arvo, exactly.
But something to eat because it's been too far from brekkie.
Exactly, spot on, yeah. So I've picked up no worries. It's like just in my vocabulary, and I said it the other day, and when I was in Melbourne, and someone looked at me and just was like, where are you from? And I've noticed, like, I give my daughter a lot of grief because she doesn't say garbage can, she says rubbish bin. And that's like just a quintessential thing. And the way she says it as well, it's got a little bit of a clip to it. So rubbish bin, rubbish. You know, I kind of give her grief over that one.
Well, pick up wuckers.
Yeah.
What?
Wuckers? No wuckers?
Wuckers. Oh,
Yeah.
right, yes.
No wuck and furries.
Ah, yes.
So I'm not going to spell it out because we don't want the explicit rating on. Yeah, but that's very Australian as well. So your family moved with you to Singapore and didn't move back.
Well, some of them stayed. My daughter, my wife are here in California. My two sons decided after 5 years over there they want to kind of make it a go. Now, I think my younger son had a lot of reason to do so. He's been dating a young woman from Malaysia, and they actually have an HDB flat. It's a type of condo up in the north end of the island of Singapore. So he just finished school doing programming work and game design. And his girlfriend is a graphic designer, really amazing artist. She does beautiful cartoon work. I've even used some of her work on stage demoing Character Animator.
Oh yeah.
So so we'll see how this all works out. My older son just finished up his military service over there, so he had to do 2 years of mandatory military service.
That's right. What's it called? What is that called?
Conscription.
Conscription? No. I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of countries. Israel has a mandatory military service as well.
Yeah, and it's funny because if you talk to a lot of the cab drivers in Singapore, they'll remind you over and over again that it was the Israeli sergeants, the drill sergeants, that actually came over to establish the Singapore military. They hired a bunch of them, and they always say how it was so tough back then, and the kids have it easy now. They should bring the Israelis back because they really taught us, So. But he enjoyed it. He enjoyed the basic training. He dropped 26 kilos, and he got stationed as a security trooper, which is sort of like military police. It's kind of one rank lower than like a full-on MP, but they're the ones that are responsible for patrolling perimeters, and they have to carry live ammunition and walk the fences of the bases. So he was set to guard an ammo dump in the center of the island. We used to joke about whether the monkeys were going to revolt and invade, but
It's a pretty locked down society.
pretty much. Part of the security in Singapore does come from the military, though. I just saw today that they uncovered a plot in Indonesia where they were going to try and fire rockets from an island in Indonesia and hit the Marina Bay Sands.
Wow.
And so, it's kind of a relevant thing that the military in Singapore is like having every male citizen or every child of a permanent resident go through military training just kind of adds to that kind of sense of security in Singapore. So.
Yeah, my brother had a whole bunch of issues when he was a teenager coming back through Singapore from a trip they came to visit. I spent a year in Japan as an exchange student. Oh, wow. And on the way back, my parents came and visit with my brother, and on the way back they did a couple of stops, and his hair was too long to get into Singapore, and there was huge drama. Eventually they let him in on the condition that he would get a cut and report back the next day with a cut. And
Wow. Interesting.
Stubbornness is a family trait.
Yeah. Well, I've heard of, one of the things that I used to take kind of a weird sense of pleasure watching is I would always see tourists go into 7-Eleven in Singapore and they wander around going, I can't find the gum. Where is the gum here?
Yeah, and there is none.
There is none, and it's just every time I heard it, it was always kind of a smile. Whether it was an American, a British, Australian, didn't matter the accent. It just always kind of put a smile on my face because you had to kind of stop them and say, stop looking. You're not going to find it. Yeah. So. Yeah, there's a whole bizarre story around that too about how some minister sat in gum on one of the MRT subways, and coupled with the fact that people were sticking it to the doors in the subways and causing problems, the government just stepped in and said, right, it's outlawed, it's gone. Yeah. So, that said, there's still one employee in the Adobe office in Singapore that will remain nameless who drives over the border, buys a bunch of gum, brings it back, and you can always go to her desk if you want a piece of gum. You can always find it. So.
Contraband.
Yeah. Yeah, not illegal per se. It's illegal to sell, but if you have it, there's you're not going to get in trouble for it. So
So how did you start out? I mean, you end up in a fairly senior position with Adobe. I think the first time I ever saw you at a trade show, you were working for Serious Magic. Was that correct? Okay, I did remember that right.
It has been a long, strange trip. If I think back on it, I left high school early. I left high school when I was 16. Went to community college and took a bunch of various classes, but really didn't know what I wanted to do at that point, and ended up taking a broadcasting program, mostly focused on audio and radio broadcasting, and I worked at radio stations for about 6 years. And I got out of radio right at the point where you were getting that massive, all the radio stations were kind of being bought up, and they had gotten rid of the duopoly laws. And so I worked at one station where in a matter of a month, my benefits package changed like 3 or 4 times. And I just said, it's like, this company bought this company, which bought this company, and it was just, everything was consolidating. So I jumped ship to go work for Apple for a while. And it wasn't a glamorous job at Apple. It was actually working at their assembly facility, and I was managing an assembly line, putting Power Mac 8500s together. Did really well with that. Won an award or two just on like improving efficiency on the assembly line. And but I had gotten completely away from where I originally wanted to be, which was involved in some kind of film and broadcasting. And I had the opportunity to leave Apple and go to work for a company called Play Incorporated.
Kiki Stockhammer.
Yeah. Snappy Video Snapshot and the Trinity, and I ended up landing at Play Incorporated. I ended up being a tech director for about 2 years for the little entertainment division that we had in the back of the building called Play TV, and we did 12 hours a day of original programming.
Oh wow.
So this was live broadcasting with tech direction, vision mixing, switching. So I ended up being the tech director for one of the 2-hour talk shows that we had. And focused on that, did a little bit of editing, did a little bit of graphic design, kind of picked up just, general skills dealing with setting up and working cameras. And at the same time, I learned a heck of a lot setting up for trade shows, because at the time, our whole goal of the trade show was to actually set up a live television studio on the floor of NAB, IBC, any of these big major broadcasting shows. And so I learned a heck of a lot. I consider Play kind of like my college in a lot of respects, because I was working with software engineers, hardware engineers, spanning the amount of experience that was working there at the time. You had people from Grass Valley, you had people from New Tech. It was just a huge group of people. And I kept a good relationship with Mark Randall for years. And after going off and doing independent editing and training for about 2 years, Mark had a new product at Serious Magic for virtual sets and chroma keying, which was called Ultra.
Yep.
And they were looking for somebody to go to NAB and be sort of a demo person, understand the technology, and eventually that led to eventually becoming a product marketing manager for Serious Magic. And when they got acquired, that's how I ended up at Adobe.
There's a lot of people from Serious Magic at Adobe. I heard that in fact Mark Randall was was largely the reason why they bought Serious Magic, was to get Mark on board.
I tell you what, Mark has done really, really well. He's a VP of creative strategy. And recently he's been really involved in a program that internally we call the Red Box program. And it's a way of driving innovation internally within the company, that if you have an idea for a product internally, you can go through a special couple-day training course, and at the end of this you're handed a red box. Inside that red box is a $1,000 gift card and a bunch of information about how to kind of realize what you want to work on. And if you complete everything that's in the red box, that leads you to the next step, which is something they call the blue box, which is a way of further productizing and getting your idea into the company more in a mainstream way. So it's been a very successful program internally to just kind of drive interesting ideas and kind of move forward internally within the company.
That's a really good idea. I like that.
Yeah, I hear from a lot of people that Adobe is really a great place to work. But I'm not sure that I'm suitable for a big company.
It was a little culture shock, It was like coming from a small company. I think the thing that surprised me the most were there's a whole series of regulations we used to have dealing with what was called revenue recognition. And I once saw a situation where we were getting ready to release a new version of Premiere that had support for an NVIDIA graphics card that came out about 6 months earlier. We couldn't quite get the support in the earlier shipping release. So we went to release it in this dot update, and the lawyers actually came back and said, nope, you have to pull that out because the card was out 3 months after you're outside of your window, basically, to add support for free for that card. And having worked for all these different startups over the years, it was just kind of a foreign concept. We used to, if somebody asked for support for a card on a Monday, oftentimes we were shipping it out on a Friday. But that was it was one of many reasons why we Adobe kind of moved to the cloud. Because everything is great. Thank you.
Some more. Oh yes.
The whole idea of not being able to do things in an update when it makes sense for the customer. Now that everything is subscription based, we can push out a dot release, as needed if new technology comes out.
And is that because of Sarbanes-Oxley law, or is that specifically what?
It is Sarbanes-Oxley, and I want to stress I am not any type of an expert when it comes to that legal stuff. It's like everything I know is strictly anecdotal, but I have seen it happen where we were actually told, because of Sarbanes-Oxley, you have to remove something because it's a free thing that you're giving away that
people haven't paid for. There's a chance for you to start eating, because I'm going to talk a little bit about that.
And Sarbanes-Oxley specifically applies to publicly traded companies?
Publicly traded companies,
So a smaller, privately held company
can do what they please. But there's really only one model. There's a couple of models, but they all come down to two basic distinctions. One, all updates are free forever, and that's where Apple have fallen. Or you go pure subscription model, which is where Adobe have ended up, and makes a lot of sense and has certainly worked for the company. I'm using Adobe tools that I would never have gone out and paid money for, just in the hope that I might like Muse, or it might work for me. Whereas having it as a simple download as part of the package, that I'm getting everything for my $50 a month. And we are paying customers. I don't personally use Premiere Pro, but most of the time since the subscription, we've been paying customers, because I use Photoshop, Illustrator, I use Muse, I used to use Dreamweaver, and it was a happy day to take it off my computer. And then Avid have gone with this sort of, it's really a subscription, but you get to keep the last version that you stop paying. So it's kind of meets the needs of Sarbanes-Oxley for them to continue on to give to talk about future updates as well, because that's the other problem. And Apple started talking about multicam and video out with Final Cut Pro 10 before they shipped it, and the lawyers came in and said, well, you can't recognize any of that revenue until you fix that, you've shipped those features. So there was a period of 3 or 4 months where Apple officially didn't have any revenue from Final Cut Pro 10. Not that they care, but...
Well, as a pure software company, I mean, that's not an option for us. We don't have any... Adobe doesn't have any type of hardware to kind of fall back on, so it just makes a lot of sense for the company, and it's been,
it's been a huge success.
The company, I'm very impressed by just the leadership of the company from a Wall Street standpoint. It's been a fantastic move for the company overall, and there was some initial hesitation for some people. I still have one of my friends up in the Sacramento region that he mostly works with the government. He still edits on like Premiere Pro 1.5 or something. All he cares about is HDV editing, because all of his equipment is HDV, and the state government agency that he works for, that's all they want. And so his attitude has been, why do I even want to bother upgrading? And it's been like that for years. So, I have another friend of mine in Hawaii that kind of has the same attitude. And with him, I mean, he's still using Media 100. So you just get the sense that there's always going to be people that just want to own something and treat it as an appliance.
Surprisingly, though, Media 100 is an active product still.
Yeah.
They're still actually, I think it's at version 13. That Boris has continued developing the app. They bought it from the Israeli company that was going to do great things with it, and then, of course, did nothing with it. And I think they sold it to Boris for, well, you take over the debt and the customer load. Support issues, because that was...
I do feel like the industry is kind of missing this is just a personal opinion of mine looking at the video industry. I kind of miss Pinnacle. Just from a standpoint that there's always interesting technology that kind of floats out in the industry. And I think we're at a point where some of it is kind of getting lost. Like people aren't, if a company, obviously when you have a lot of engineering overhead, the technology itself can get lost. And it seemed like years ago, Pinnacle kind of made a reputation for themselves by finding those gems and finding a price point that kind of made sense for the technology to kind of reach sort of critical mass. And I feel like that's something we're kind of missing these days.
There's definitely a decrease in the number of companies that are sort of represented in our space. I mean, if you cast your mind back to NAB of 2000, let's say.
We had Macromedia, we had Media 100, we had, of course, Avid, we had Adobe there. There was a lot.
All those card companies. We were talking about this last night. The people that made all of those sort of graphics cards, but they were...
Well, they're I/O cards.
Yes. So, ICE.
Oh yeah, well that was a GPU accelerator, or a specific accelerator. A really odd product in today's world, now that we've got these effectively GPU accelerating everything.
Yeah.
That was an interesting product.
General purpose GPUs have just just changed everything in that space. That and HDMI, it just seems like the challenges of getting this device to send video to this device are starting to kind of drop away a bit. I know from a presentation perspective, it's so nice to be able to just walk into a facility and plug in one cable and go, okay, right, we're done. As opposed to the usual headaches of, oh wait, what resolution are you running? Well, wait, hold on, let's change something here. Oh wait, the video run is too close to the audio run and it's causing it. Oh wait,
I've been to the Barnsdale, yeah, okay.
Yeah, make sure you cross over your audio cables and your power cables at right angles so they don't introduce hum.
That just bit us in Mumbai last year. We didn't even notice the issue until we went to play off of one of the laptops on stage this little music segment with like this driving beat, this thump, thump, thump. And all of a sudden we looked at the screen and saw the screen kind of going zzz, 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 in time with the music. And sure enough, they had to rerun the VGA cable, which is what we had access to, and it went away.
Yeah, perfect. But that's been a lot of change, so how do you embrace change?
How do you embrace change?
Or how do you deal with it in general?
Head on, if possible. I think a good example right now is this crazy interest in 360 video and VR. And I think it's really funny because when I first saw this, it brought me back to the 1990s, and I remember when QuickTime VR came out. I remember seeing this Flash-based demo, which was a point of view. It was the first 360 narrative that I had ever seen, and it was basically a point of view. At first, they kept talking about taking you to the retirement home, and you were in this car at one point, and eventually you're sitting in a waiting room in a chair, and you're looking around, and different people are talking to you. And at the end of it, the camera kind of flips around and pulls back, and you're an old-fashioned CRT television.
Right.
And I can remember that demo very distinctively because I watched it over and over again. It predates YouTube, so this had to be like late 90s. And it was all flash-driven, little, 320 by 240 might be too generous of a size for it. But it was a 360 experience. And now we've gotten to a point where, I can shoot 360 on this thing, and the next step is something like this is going to get integrated into a phone, so everybody just has it. It's interesting how this stuff kind of, when it goes away, it kind of comes back again. Once everything kind of comes together, It's a challenge. You know, it's one of those things that I find myself just trying to keep up with the features and not the big features per se, but the little improvements that they're constantly making to the applications. You know, I myself start kind of second guessing myself sometimes about, it's like someone will ask me, it's like, well, is there a preference to change this? And the best
it's Premiere, it probably is.
Yeah. And yeah, the best answer I can usually give them is, well, let's find out, you know, because you know, what might have been there, you know, it's very rare we take something away. It does happen on occasion, but more often than not, we'll see you know, additional things like additional keyboard shortcuts, additional preferences show up, and of course those don't make the top 10 feature list. So those are the harder ones to keep up with, and I just find that I have to kind of block out a week every month and just give myself time to kind of cut a project, kind of create something. And with the move, everything else, I feel like I'm a little behind on that curve right now. And lo and behold, IBC is coming up in another little while. So
4 weeks.
Yeah.
Yes, it's something like 4 weeks, and Greg currently doesn't have any travel documentation.
Uh-oh.
It's in the mail, maybe.
Maybe I've got our return. Yeah, it's he's been on E3, which is like an H1B for Australians only. I got citizenship. I had approval to bring my spouse to live with me, and now we're in the process of changing the approval into an actual green card.
Right.
For that reason, he's sort of the E3 that runs out, I think, in a week, is not going to get him back in the country if we go to Europe.
Yeah.
And so that's an opportunity. That's where we're kind of in this horrible little messy stage until this gets settled. And that will then be the last part of our transition into being very, very boring suburbanites. Well, non-suburbanites, but the last year I've become a US citizen. We bought a house, neither of which were intended at this time. Well, by this time last year they were intended. They were on the line. And no, neither were intended at this point in the last year. It's just Jerry Hoffman started us thinking about buying. He said, "You guys are stupid for not buying." and it is thanks to Final Cut Pro 10 that we were able to buy, and the need to translate between the two versions, and of course now between Premiere Pro and the Adobe suite and Final Cut Pro 10, because I think the time has come when Final Cut Pro 7 to 10 transitioners are not really buying the apps very much. It's really to work between backwards and forwards with the Adobe suite that we have those apps.
But apparently it allows Premiere Pro editors and Final Cut 10 editors to collaborate with each other, which is not something that I would recommend, but it seems to work.
We did have a customer who said that they had recently used 7 to 10 and 10 to CC as to do a collaborative workflow with them on this coast working with Final Cut Pro 10, somebody on the East Coast working with Premiere. And obviously copies of the same media. Media is because the two apps deal with media very differently, that's part of the challenge too.
Yeah, absolutely. I have one friend of mine in Singapore, a young lady named Jackie Hawking, that is a longtime editor. She's been CEO of various companies. She has the first Singaporean B Corp, is a company called Gone Adventuring, and she's actually quite big in the B Corp space, this idea of doing a corporation that has sort of a mission statement attached to that, so that it's not just pure revenue driven.
Right, yeah.
And but she's so much of an editor that she actually has the pause, rewind, fast forward buttons tattooed on her wrist. And she knows Avid, she knows Final Cut 7, she knows Premiere. About a year ago, I think it was, she sat down, she basically said she put herself through four months of hell, and she has learned Final Cut 10 and actually enjoys it a lot. So for what they're doing, it actually is the right tool for them.
Yeah. I think we're blessed in that there are so many good tools these days.
Definitely.
There was a period when digital was new where you had to pick carefully as to the combination of hardware and software that you used, and choose a software that would do the job, because there was a lot of period there where, Premiere wasn't the professional tool that it is now. And
it's definitely evolved a lot in the last few years.
to the point where a lot of people even questioned the continuation of the Premiere brand into Premiere Pro when they rebuilt the app
You know what's really funny is we actually did a lot of study on that internally, and there were a lot of like discussions about, do we change it, do we not change it, and at the end of the day, it just has so much recognition to it. It was decided to just focus on the naming and focus on keeping that legacy in place, just change the public perception. And I tell you, when I moved to Singapore and started working in Asia, part of what predicated that is I went on a tour with one of our senior directors, and we went in a bunch of broadcasting spaces, and this was 5 years ago, and just basically sat down, and they would thank us and be very polite and say, we appreciate you coming, and we use After Effects and we use Photoshop, but we don't understand why you want to talk to us about Premiere, because Premiere is not a broadcast ready tool. And it was that attitude that is what kind of drove me to want to move to Asia. And originally I was going to spend 2 to 3 years there. 5, it was longer than anticipated. I enjoyed every minute of it, but I'm really glad to be home too. So.
No, but you're absolutely right, because definitely After Effects had the reputation of being best of breed. Photoshop is best of breed, and at that time, Premiere was
not best of breed.
And you've come a long way, baby. It's really good.
Yeah, it's been good to see. I mean, staying the extra couple of years, when I left, I really kind of feel like it was sort of mission accomplished as far as changing that mindset. Because by the end of it, we were just getting people coming up to us saying, yeah, we're going to buy a bunch of copies of Premiere, and it was more about how do we get help, how do we get training on this. And so we had actually done a lot of work to try and establish training centers in places in Southeast Asia to kind of make that happen.
How's your Cuban?
It's good. It's actually a pretty good Cuban.
Really good.
It's really good, yeah. I think the last time I had a Cubano was on an extended layover trying to get down to Rio de Janeiro. I missed my flight by like a minute and a half. So I had a 24-hour layover in Miami, and I remember finding a little place and having a Cubano sandwich.
When I spent time in Florida for the Aborted Solar Odyssey project, I was just driving down the road trying to get to the next destination, looking for somewhere to have lunch. Totally saw a sandwich board sign on the side of the road saying, Cuban food. I thought, just a mini mall. So right in there, like tiny little hole in the wall place, really good food. Of course, now we have Yelp, so you don't have to run that risk. So what do you think is the biggest change that you've experienced in your career so far? It can be technology, it can be society. It's the biggest change.
I think you can't overlook the change from hardware-driven workflows to software-driven workflows. I think that's just on a fundamental level, what's opened it up for everybody is that you can have a general-purpose laptop that also can do a reasonably good job with video editorial.
Yeah, or audio editorial, or scripting, or visual effects, or poster design.
Do you guys remember a short film called 405 the movie?
Yes.
And there was such a huge outpouring of this, and of course this was pre-YouTube, so there was nowhere to host it. And these guys, they would host it on this server for a while, and then the bandwidth would run out, and they'd have to move it to another server. And it was just, visual effects guys with a bunch of, a render farm in their closet, coming up with this. And everybody was, completely freaking out over this. And it's you look at the quality of content that's put up on a day-to-day basis now on YouTube, and we've kind of arrived. It's you don't really, if you have a really cool, interesting idea, you don't have to rely on having someone who's going to front you the hardware costs, and also the distribution side of it is I'd say this is the second biggest change that we've seen. Yeah. It's really hard to imagine life pre-YouTube.
Yes.
It just, that's one of those fundamental changes that I always look back on, and I joke with my daughter, I joke with my kids about it. It's I remember when you had to host video yourselves, and...
Well, I actually tried to embed a self-hosted video in Muse, and ultimately gave up because I couldn't work out how to make it happen. Whereas embedding a YouTube video into a page in Muse is so easy.
They make it ridiculously easy. Yeah.
And you don't have to worry about things like, can you remember when browsers, you had to have a particular plugin installed to play particular video? Because we hadn't had the format settling down to MP4, so, you know, if it was a stupid .mov embeds and
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. It's and then you think about also the changes of distribution with all the new companies coming out like Netflix. Rolling Stone magazine has an interesting article right now about, it's an interview with the guys who came up with this, what is it called? I want to say Stranger Days. It's this new series on Netflix.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't seen it yet.
I haven't seen it yet either, but I'm actually starting to jones to watch. Maybe I'll sit down this weekend and binge watch it, because they're saying that it's very Spielberg-esque. It's very kind of a throwback to movies like E.T. And the interesting tidbit that came out of this is the guys say they shopped this to 15 to 20 networks, and all of them turned it down, saying you either have to turn it into a kid's show and get rid of the darker elements, or you have to make it about this one adult character, and you can have kids in it, but you have to change your core premise.
Wow.
And Netflix just greenlit the whole thing. There was not a pilot, it wasn't none of the traditional way you produce a TV show. And for stuff like that, especially from a worldwide basis, companies like Netflix are looking for original content from everywhere.
Do you think that this democratization is a good thing, or is this something that has ruined it for everybody?
I think that's a tough question to. It's a tough question to answer, really, because I think it depends on what your goal is. If you're a creative individual and you want to make creative stuff, I think that you're living in a better time now than any time in the past, for just being able to have access to the right tools, the training on those tools, and have a delivery platform where you can put something out. If your goal is to make money, that's the challenge right now. I think I do see a lot of people out there that, and don't get me wrong, there are avenues for addressing that. When the platforms first got started, they were sort of like a way of having like a live resume, and I saw people start to get hired based on what they were putting up on Vimeo and YouTube.
405 the movie that we just talked about.
Yeah, exactly. But now we are starting to see a situation where, like, I went to VidCon back in June, and VidCon really just opened my eyes to the wacky insanity that is YouTube fandom. It really seems like you can have these sort of micro audiences, and I mean, when I say a micro audience, you're still talking about like 60,000 people. But if you're producing regular original content, there starts to become a revenue stream from YouTube, and so there's interesting ideas. I think all of that is still in flux, and it's just starting to settle down around like a YouTube ecosystem just in the last like 4 or 5 years. And it'll be interesting to see what disrupts that, or if something disrupts that moving forward.
Yeah, I'm a fan of a young Australian performer called Troye Sivan, who's making some inroads into the States, but South African born but lived in Australia, in Perth, which is nearly not part of Australia. Not the part we all think about, but beautiful nonetheless. And he started his YouTube channel when he was something like 12, just doing covers of songs, and slowly built up a fan base. Then he self-released 2 EPs, but that got him roles in movies, feature films, TV series. So at 19, 20 now, he's got 3 movies behind him. He's got an EMI recording deal. He's coming up to his 2nd tour of the United States shortly. But he built it all from this foundation on YouTube. And even when he was casting for a music video for one of the album videos, he needed to find somebody who was look normal, but not a buff model type look, and was still okay with kissing a guy, because that's the theme of his music. Is that he is gay. So he actually found the person was one of his friends on Facebook, was somebody who did the music video role because he couldn't find anyone through the normal casting.
Wow.
So he's been a real master of the social media to build his career and to advance it as well.
Wow. Yeah, I just one of the experiences I had at VidCon, we had a little bit of a booth for Adobe there, and we did some really interesting interviews. We had people like Devin Graham from the Devin Supertramp channel, and we did the interviews. Actually, we had an old clawfoot bathtub, and so people would actually sit in the bathtub for the interviews. We called it the U-tub.
Okay.
You know,
okay.
So that worked really, really well. But we had a moment where we had to shut down the entire booth because right next to us on one of these stages for like Bitly or Musical.ly or one of these sites, some kid, a 14-year-old kid named Jacob, was up performing. And suddenly our booth usually it's the other way around. Like I'm used to going to NAB and like you see the Adobe booth and you see everybody crowding into the aisles and the neighbors are all upset. We were the neighbor in this case, you know, and it was some kid. I had to text my daughter. I'm like, who is this guy? And she was like, oh, he's kind of a big deal, you know. But yeah, I don't think anybody over the age of like 20 would even know who this was. So, you know, it does point to, you know, just the changes that are going on in this space. I wish I had an idea of like how this was going to all end. You know, it's the one dangerous thing that I'm seeing, I think, especially on the political scene right now with social media, is the whole concept of kind of feeding in on itself with the way social media does. So I'll be completely neutral third party here. If you click on videos about Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, you get fed more videos and more articles and everything else about that particular candidate. And this is true about any issue, whether you fall on one side or the other of it. The more you click one direction, the more social media skews what you see in that direction.
So it's very much pushing you into a confirmation bias.
Exactly.
It's confirming your confirmation bias.
Because look at all these other people that agree with me. The world is filled with them.
And I don't see anything in my feed that disagrees with me anymore.
Exactly. You know, and I mean, just as a sanity check, you know, I check 3 news sites a day. I check CNN, I check Fox News, and I check the BBC, and just kind of scan what the 3 headlines are, just to sort of try and get a sense as to what reality might be. And I think exactly what you said, confirmation bias, I think is playing a big part in, you know, what we're seeing with politics and kind of some of the anger in politics today.
So, what advice would you give your younger self, or somebody starting out in the career?
Wow,
That's a crappy question.
that's a tough one to answer. I think the biggest thing is be open to any opportunity. Don't let yourself, you know, unless you are adamant that this is what you want to do and this is who you want to be, and even then, don't assume the path to get there. I think you can pick a destination in life. The path is entirely up to chance, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it. I think you know, you just have to be open to the options that are going to get you where you need to be. And
I think options that you might not have seen beforehand. A lot of what we deal with in the development of the software is it has to get to a certain point before you realize, well, now that we've got this, what we really, really want. And this
You couldn't see that at the beginning.
I saw this happening with After Effects in earlier days, where there was a very tight community, and some of the leading After Effects users were very tight with the developers.
Right.
That's a very close relationship there. And so a new version of After Effects would come out, people would start to use the new tools and realize that if only they could do just a little bit more with those tools, then they could do all of this extra stuff. And so the developers go back and add more of that. And so it's not until you get to the top of the hill you realize that there's another more interesting hill in the distance. And careers are somewhat like that.
yeah, definitely. If you know, one of the more interesting things I can remember at one point after Play Incorporated, I worked with a guy who was a distributor for the Play technology, a guy named Tai Si Bo in Singapore. And I remember having discussions with him back in the early 90s. And this just came up right before I left, because it's like suddenly I had this memory come back to me about talking to Bo in St. Louis, Missouri. We were having this discussion about what Singapore was like. And if you had asked my younger self at that point, you had said, hey, what do you think about the fact you're going to be living in Singapore for 5 years later on? I'd been like, nah, never going to happen,
What are the chances you're going to end up being an American citizen? Never going to happen. No, America's okay, but who'd want to live there?
And Los Angeles. Oh my
Los
God.
Angeles, yeah.
Why would anybody pick LA?
Well, unfortunately, Los Angeles is one of those places where I have felt very much at home from the first trip. So,
I tell you, that's been one of the biggest surprises actually living here, because I grew up in Northern California, and there's a huge rivalry between Northern California and Southern California just on everything. I grew up as a Sacramento Kings fan. Sorry, Lakers fans. I grew up as a San Francisco Giants fan. So the sports rivalries are huge. The attitude about the way of life is completely different. And I've had so many of my Northern California friends being like, oh, you're going to hate the traffic, you're not going to like the attitude down there, and everybody's superficial and blah, 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 and all these very stereotypical statements about what Northern California thinks about Southern California. So far, I'm loving it. It's I can actually go to the beach and the water's reasonably warm, and I can get in and swim around.
Thanks, global warming.
But yeah, and I think from a traffic perspective, I think I've got a different outlook on that, having driven in Bangkok and Malaysia and Manila, taken taxis over and over again in places like Mumbai. It's
it's quite good by comparison.
Yeah, and the nature of the grid, with applications like Waze and whatnot, it's you can get from point A to point B in a reasonable amount of time without too big of a problem.
One of the things that I really, really like about HBO's show Silicon Valley, that's kind of Hollywood sticking it to how superficial people up north are.
Yeah, definitely. I've only caught a couple of episodes on that. You'd be surprised what I'm actually watching right now. I never ever got a chance to watch The Sopranos.
Oh, okay.
And I'm actually I've been binge watching The Sopranos, probably 2 or 3 episodes a night after I get home. And
Binge watching? What did we do before binge watching?
I know, that's been a huge cultural shift. And, I think back to days of the original Twin Peaks. Yes. When it came out and how groundbreaking it was. Growing up in Sacramento, California, the quintessential episode where they reveal who killed Laura Palmer, the local station cut in at the 35-minute mark because there was some kind of hostage situation unfolding in the south part of the city. Okay. And so we didn't get to see the last 30 minutes of the episode. And the station basically said, due to rebroadcasting rights, they had crossed over the half-hour threshold. They didn't have the ability to rebroadcast it. So we just basically didn't, and I was such a fan of that show, and it was kind of after that, you're just well, now what,
Television has let me down.
Yes.
And we talked a little bit about the biggest changes so far, but what do you think, given all this context, the biggest changes you're going to see in the rest of your career are going to be?
The biggest change moving forward?
Yeah.
Wow.
And if you get this right, you can make a fortune.
True, true. I have to say, I'm really kind of shocked about the growth just in the last 6 months of 360 and VR. I did this trip involving 30,000 miles across 6 cities in Asia, and every single stop I went, I had people coming up to me going, yeah, we're doing something with VR. We're doing something with 360 video. Went to a broadcaster in China, and they had a whole new division of the company that was starting up to push this further.
I tend to think that augmented reality is going to be more accessible by more people more quickly, whether VR eventually recognises its potential. People who are fairly expert in VR say, initially people are doing all this looking around, and then they settle down and look within about a 20-degree arc for the rest of the piece. So I wonder if we're putting the emphasis on something that people are not really going to use, whereas Pokemon Go
Oh yeah.
It's showing where augmented reality can go very quickly. I mean, without changing technology, without having to put helmets on. We went to the Lassie Pug, the Creative Pro User Group in LA just last week, and the whole park was just full of people. Never before have there been 100 people in that park on a Wednesday night.
There's a training gym there, and
It's a place that spawns a very, very rare type of Pokemon.
Yeah.
Actually, I read an article yesterday. Los Angeles has the most variety of rare Pokemons of any city in the country. So we are going to get Pokemon tourists.
Wow. Yeah, I can totally see that. My daughter's playing, and yeah, I went to the same user group meeting, and we actually got there really, really early. And there was this phenomenon where you could tell where in the app you can see when a Pokemon spawns in a given area, and you would suddenly see, like, it reminded me of a scene out of Walking Dead. You saw all these people walking as a group in one direction, trying to see where the Pokemon actually show up and try and capture it.
I suggested that they can shoot the next season of Walking Dead simply by putting a lure in the background and just like soft focus all these people walking around all look like zombies.
I'm waiting for the satire movie with people, you know. I think you're right. I think augmented reality, I think Google Glass was probably way ahead of its time, and I think that's sort of the next thing that we'll see is something with like a full heads-up type of a display going on with augmented reality. And 180 video is actually kind of an interesting idea, especially when you start talking about trying to do stereo, because right now just the cameras and the technology to do stereo 360 is a pain. And if you actually limit it down to 180, you could put together some really nice professional rigs with like red cameras. And I see sports being another like one of those killer applications for VR. Because if you could provide a 50-yard line football experience or provide a courtside basketball experience to the hardcore, or boxing, ringside boxing, and provide that experience of sitting ringside and being able to look around, you don't need 360, but you would want stereo 180 with audio cues, and I could really see that kind of taking off. It really leads to, I saw this video with Elon Musk talking about somebody at a conference asked him the question of whether we're living in a computer simulation. It's quite an interesting answer he gives. He basically points out the fact that 50 years ago, state-of-the-art graphics were a dot and two lines. And just in 50 years' time, we've gone from that into immersive experiences that people are still looking at on a flat screen, but it's basically an entire world map generated with multiple people playing interactive gaming. So what's to say in 800 years from now? What trying to imagine what the future of gaming is going to hold. I've already seen. I mean, that's one of the interesting things about this is it will merge some of the gaming technologies and some of the video production technologies are going to have to find a medium in the middle, because all the real VR experiences that I've seen, if they're using 360 video, they're also using some kind of a gaming engine to provide that interactivity. And what I've seen so far has been relatively primitive, where you have a 360 experience in this location and you have kind of a map connecting these bubbles together, but and you have to kind of move your head and point and look specifically at something. I think that's kind of the next thing that we're going to see is like little mini cameras pointing back at our eyes and seeing how our pupils dilate, and kind of you could probably read full emotion from that.
And there are already technologies for reading emotion on faces. I'm fascinated by how fast these artificial intelligences, or the algorithms that are the beginnings in the direction of potentially going to real AI. But I did a blog post yesterday about how one organisation is using AI to develop their script. Another is used it to write a script. It turned out to be pretty terrible, but the fact that you were doing that, we have image recognition technologies, we have speech to text, which Adobe flirted with, but didn't pick the best technology and didn't optimize the audio, so it only got the good audio. There's two criticisms on that. But the time will come when that technology matures.
Well, we're continuing to look at it. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's image recognition. So send an image up to the cloud and get back 10 keywords that describe that image. there are, and these are open APIs. IBM Watson, Cordana at Microsoft, a whole bunch of other AI, these technologies that are open for anyone to use. Going to make huge changes, really huge changes over the next 5 years in pretty much everything that we do.
Yep.
It's been really great having lunch. If people want to follow up with you on something, where can they find you?
I always maintain a blog. It's blogs.adobe.com/videoroad. I've had that for years from when I was a worldwide evangelist. So I always am looking for ideas for interesting articles to write up there. I think the last article I have right now is just talking about, multicam, multi-channel audio, and kind of understanding the bits and pieces and getting that set up right in Premiere. Other than that, I'm always on Twitter at Karl Soule.
Well, thanks very much for coming to lunch.
All right, thanks so much, guys.